Actuaries really do? What really actuarial science is? Rushabh Shah is a senior vice president with Marsh.
We aren't statisticians, we aren't economists, we aren't accounting experts, but we know all about it.
Welcome everyone to my podcast. This is the second episode of the series, so thanks for staying tuned. For those who are new, what this podcast is really about is when I was growing up and trying to become an actuary, studying through the papers in India, I didn't find a lot of material or sources that I could just go to and find out what really actuarial science is. And I thought, we should have something where we can just get information on the go while we're running, walking. And that's how this podcast came up. I'm sure we've all felt that around our journeys that we need something which is informative and straight from the horse's mouth who have gone through this journey. So that's what this podcast is really about. With us today is Rushabh Shah. Thank you for making it to the podcast.
Thank you.
Rushabh Shah is a senior vice president with Marsh. He is the specialty analytics leader with the Marsh general insurance team. Before that, he also worked with reinsurance actuarial in Marsh. And prior to that, interestingly, he was also in employee benefits.
True.
So you've been with Marsh for around 12 years?
I was given this opportunity to basically move to Marsh and set up an actuarial team for the international practice. I did that for about 2.5 years. So we grew our team from about three people to 20 in the span of 2.5 years, and we managed to cover all the international regions like Asia, Pacific, Latin America, Europe, Middle East, and UK.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite a diverse team. I learned quite a lot through that journey of speaking to stakeholders from all these various regions. I think I benefited quite a lot and learned quite a bit speaking to clients, from all these different backgrounds. So it was an interesting role. It was COVID as well, so a lot of barriers were broken as everyone was working from home, so there were no geographical boundaries.
True.
That helped quite a bit. And then I moved, I was offered a role to move to the UK to basically lead the analytics work for specialty lines. So I decided to take that as well and try something out. So although I've been with the same company for 12 years, I've kind of moved within the company quite a bit.
And it sounds really interesting. It seems like you've done not what many actuaries have been able to do, which is, surpass so many different fields and understand how different things work. And I think just having that perspective, that zoomed out view will really, benefit. We'll unpack more of your professional journey in a bit, because that all sounds so exciting and there's so much there that we want to untangle and understand more. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about your college days. Let's start from there. I know you studied in Bombay and you started pursuing actuarial science during your college days. So
yes, that was it brings back a lot of memories. I first learned about what actuarial science is through my dad. He had read an article that was written by an appointed actuary about actuarial science, which was quite
so heartening to hear.
Forward thinking for that time, from
Absolutely.
For an appointed actuary to be speaking publicly about the profession was a bit rare. So I read about it, but I forgot about it after that. But CFA was one thing that I did think about as well during that time. But there was a legal issue going on between CFA institutes, and we weren't allowed to sit for exams in India, so I didn't want to basically fly out every time to write an exam. So I dropped that as another option. And then a friend of mine in college said that because I was quite good at maths and probability specifically, he said that why don't you try actuarial science? A friend of his was giving the exams, and that's when it came back to me about what my dad had showed me on the profession. So it's not as easy as it is today. The website wasn't great, so I had to go to the Institute of Actuaries of India
in person.
And basically they used to have a prospectus which they would give and say, read this and you'll find out more. And then I read it. The entry criteria was quite simple at that time. It was you need to have scored like I think more than 85 or 90 in A level equivalent in maths, and I had that, so I just showed that and I became a student member. There was no entry exam.
Right.
So I decided to select a couple of subjects, like statistics and economics, and I bought the notes. That was a funny story as well, but maybe for another time. But in I think the first exam I sat was, I would want to say September of 2008, which seems like a long time ago now. But yeah, I think I sat September 2008 and I gave CT3. And I went into the exam and I didn't know that you were allowed to carry a table book for the exam, which was a bit embarrassing. But you see, that was the state of information available back then, that there was no one to say, you could carry this is what you need to do. The notes itself were so, I wouldn't say they were great at that time because they didn't really say what you could and couldn't do. So yeah, I didn't know that, and then I realized it in that exam that I should have carried this.
Question: Did you pass that exam?
No, I failed quite miserably, and it came as a rude shock because till that time in life I hadn't really failed an exam, and it was the first time I actually failed an exam, and it was the first exam of a set of 15 exams.
Correct.
So if you think about it, the impact of that psychologically can be quite significant because
Absolutely. Yeah.
you've never come across a setback like that.
Yeah.
But I was quite perseverant that time as well. I knew that it's not a case of constant failure that I'm going to see, but at some point I will succeed in giving the exam. So I didn't stop. I didn't have any professional training or someone coaching me on actuarial exams at that time. It was all self-study.
Yeah.
So I knew that maybe the effort I have isn't good enough at this point, but eventually it will get there. And yeah, so in the first 2 or 3 years I was quite unsuccessful, I would say, in the exams, but I learned quite a lot in terms of the difficulty of the exams and what it takes to pass an exam. Eventually I did succeed and qualify as an actuary.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time back then. I think information asymmetry was a big problem, and I'm sure there must have been a lot of actuaries like me who didn't suffer from the same problems. But I'm glad that the profession has progressed quite a bit since then.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting that you mentioned very important things there while you were covering your actuarial journey. I think the first thing that I want to unpack, and probably this is because I've heard a lot of students say that, and I myself used to wonder, when you give CFA exams, you do get exemptions. So
Yes.
there is clearly an overlap, but in the practical professional world, could you shed a little bit of light into what's the nuances in
Yes.
practical terms?
So the CFA program is very focused on investment management and financial analysis of basically stocks.
Yeah.
So it's quite a conformist kind of talent that you need. If you want to get into that, you need to be specifically interested in the financial markets and the analysis of financial instruments and how they manage them. So if you see a lot of fund managers who manage mutual funds would usually have a CFA degree.
Right.
So it's quite specific to that. The actuarial career path, on the other hand, is more diverse, I would say, because you learn not just about finance, you learn economics, you learn a bit of statistics, mathematics, even accounting. So it's quite a bit more diverse initially, and then you have to choose what you want to do eventually. So I'd say, although actuarial studies are specializing in a particular area, we are more generalists than specialists.
Understood. Yeah, and that makes sense to me. And I think it's also about what resonates with you, right? I think when you're choosing a career path, it's not just about, oh, this is hot in the market, let me do that. And you mentioned something so important, which is perseverance.
Yeah.
If you're picking any field, be it CFA, actuarial, and especially actuarial, because it's 15 papers, You need
Yes.
to be really sure that this is what you're interested in rather than, oh, this is hot, let me just
That's
do
true.
that. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, it requires a lot of time, which is quite undervalued.
Yeah.
It requires time, patience, and perseverance, I would say. Um, but just on that same topic around like CFA and actuarial, I think although a lot of actuaries and people consider actuaries as specialists in a particular domain, you need to understand that the subjects that we study, like statistics, economics, etc., we aren't statisticians, we aren't economists, we aren't accounting experts, but we know all about it. You cannot sit in front of someone who has a stats degree and say, I'm a statistician as well, because they probably would be. They've done a lot more in-depth study in that field. So, although we are specialists in the sense that we have a profession that guides us and we have specific roles that we do, our study is more generic.
Right. Yeah. I also want to dive a little bit into what you mentioned about information asymmetry in the industry. And I remember when I was a college student, that time we did have information. I mean, we did start, reading the website, and people started talking about it around me. But still, it wasn't very accessible in terms of, okay, I understand maths, stats, economics, I understand all those big words, but what do you really do, right? What are you really doing when you go, get up, go to work? What do actuaries really do? In simple words, if we had to explain it to someone, how would you explain?
That is a very difficult question. I must admit, now thinking about it, that what do I do? To put it in simple terms, what an actuary does is we value liabilities. That's the simplest form of explaining what we do. And the way we value liabilities is we try to quantify the uncertainty in a particular process. So let's say if you think about it, in insurance, there is uncertainty in terms of if you're insuring someone's life, whether they will die during the next year, and if they do, then how much should be paid. So there's uncertainty around timing of payment, and it requires some degree of quantification to figure out whether you can actually write an insurance policy for that, how much you should charge for it. So yeah, in simple terms, valuation of liabilities is what I would say. It's what we do.
Yeah, I think that's the simplest, and that fits into everything, right? Insurance, banking.
That's true, banking, anything. It's just very good liabilities.
Yeah, that's a very good way to, and that is something I'm going to dive on, which is, you mentioned there's a funny story about the notes. I want to dive into what's that.
Okay, I ordered my notes. At that time, ordering the notes also required filling up a form, and you had to there was no online transaction available. And if you think about it, it's only 15 years ago and it's still not available, which is quite funny. But so I had to send a demand draft to the institute with that, and they said, okay, come and collect the notes after 15 days. So I had to go to their office to collect the notes, and I went there with my college bag, assuming that it's only two subjects worth of notes which I have to collect, so it should easily fit in one bag. And I reached the office and I said that, look, you said you're going to give it to me, so where is it? And they said, okay. And there was a clerk, I think, there, and he said that, how are you going to carry it? And I said, I've got this bag. And then he looked at me and he was like, okay. And then he got the first set of notes, which I didn't know were the first set of notes, because he got two box files of CD3 notes. And he gave it to me and I was like, okay, that's two. It's not, it's only 2 books. So I put one in the bag and I said, I'll carry this other one. And he said, what are you going to do with the other? And I looked at him and I was a bit surprised. And then I said, isn't this the other one? He said, no, this is just one subject. And I said, okay, fine, get me the others. And then he got me the others, and then I didn't know what to do. So he said that, don't worry, I will give you a bag. and he was very kind, and he gave me a couple of bags, and so it was me with like a backpack and my hands filled with like notes. And then I wasn't sure how I was going to get out of there and get back home because I'd got the train to reach there. So I asked him if he would help me carry these notes down, and then he said, yeah, fine, I'll make you, sit in a cab and you can go home. So yeah, and then I reached home, and my parents looked at it, and they were they were unsure whether I should be doing this as a career, and they started laughing because till that time I wasn't a studious person.
Oh, really?
I was very interested in sport.
Wow.
And wasn't really that interested in study. So it was a shock to them when I said that I'm going to study these.
I think we've unpacked a lot about your initial journey, and thanks for being so transparent and candid with us. We are next going to transition a little bit into your professional life,
Sure.
and understand, your journey at Marsh. I think one of the most interesting things about your journey is that you, in spite of staying at one company, you did so many various roles,
Yeah.
and you were able to transition into not just various roles but also various fields within the subfields within actuarial science.
Correct.
So we've heard people say that actuaries are very technical people. Actuaries are people who are very much into the numbers. But when actuaries are doing roles like these, right, where you're helping corporates build their finance strategy, risk financing strategy, and insurance strategy, etc., surely you're talking to really senior people in the company who are trying to look at it from a bird's eye view and zoomed out view,
Yeah.
and really seeing the impact in the business.
Yes.
So do you think, in your opinion, actuaries are technical people?
Well, that is a
Loaded question.
it's not an easy question to answer. I'd take a step back from that and say that yes, actuaries by definition should be technical people because we've trained
Yeah.
on all these various aspects as I covered previously on stats, economics, etc. So by definition we are technical. In terms of the roles we do, it can vary depending on who you work for and what you do for them. Now in my scenario, because I work for a brokerage, it is different. We speak to businesses all the time, so
Right.
your view of what an actuary should offer to their clients is a bit different because the clients are not from an insurance background
Yeah.
usually. I won't say insurance background, I would say they aren't from a analytics background usually. They are risk managers who understand what insurance coverage they need to buy, but in terms of quantifying that, usually they require some support. So there is a bit of translation that we need to do, and communication is extremely important in doing so. So yes, it is, I would say, not highly technical in the conversation, but what we do behind the scenes is technical.
Interesting. Yeah.
And what you would find even if you work as an actuary for an insurance company is that they do technical roles, but they're expected to communicate what they do to management and people who aren't from the same background. They might know a lot about finance, but not much about probability and actuarial work. So translating the results back to the audience and ensuring there is no miscommunication, I think, is a very undervalued skill set.
I absolutely agree, and I think the institute also stresses on that. We have the CA3 exam which focuses on
That's
exactly
right.
that, which is translating technical to non-technical. And even in my previous job and this job, I think all my managers have always said you could make the best models, you could do the absolutely amazing technical work, but if that doesn't translate into business impact.
Yeah,
Is it-
I would agree with that statement. Like, it's all about being able to make sense of what
Yeah.
you've done.
So you started your career in Bombay.
Yes.
I want to talk about 2 points or 2 milestones in your life and draw a parallel with that. The first one is when you got your first actuarial job, when you first got into the corporate world, And the second milestone I want to talk to you about is the move from India to London and the move from Marsh India to Marsh London. So I want to talk about those 2 points in your career and how was it making the move and understanding the corporate world. Were there any parallels that you could draw between those 2 milestones?
2012. So yeah, 2012 is when I started my job at JLT. It was the first interview that I gave.
Oh really?
And,
Wow, no wonder.
It was the first. I'll be honest, I wasn't excited about giving interviews at all.
Oh.
I was quite the introvert and I didn't like to speak much. So, the interview process was a bit intimidating initially, but thankfully I got through. It was just one round, which was surprising, but it was one round and I got the job and I decided to take it up. At that time, I didn't really think much. There was nothing to lose, and I just took the opportunity that I got. The market wasn't developed at that time that there were significant options available. So I just took whatever opportunity I got, and I said, let's get into the actuarial world and then figure out what to do next. So I would say that I didn't think a lot at that time because I was new to it.
Yeah.
The second milestone about moving countries, because I was vastly experienced by then, I did quite a lot of thinking around what it meant for my career, personal life, etc. in terms of making a move. It wasn't an easy move. Professionally, very thankful to my colleagues at Marsh. It was quite easy for me to transition between India and the UK. Personally, it was quite a big change because I hadn't worked outside Mumbai or lived outside Mumbai before that. So it was a big change personally, but professionally, I couldn't have expected more.
That's so heartening to hear as well. And I think because, so many people do move countries, and especially now that we are seeing that there is so much transferability of skills in the different countries, I think it is intimidating at the start, right? When you feel that, okay, I don't know the culture, I don't know how it is.
Yes.
It can be intimidating at start, but like you said, if you have the right support.
I think it is hard initially because the cultures are quite different. The ways of working are different. The clients you work with could be different. So initially it takes a bit of time to understand how people work. But I think if you have an open kind of mindset and you're willing to learn and keep unlearn and relearn, then it should be quite smooth.
Yeah. I mean, we asked this to our previous guest as well, and he said, why have you put in this question? So I'm expecting a similar reaction from you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever had a time in your corporate career where you went into a meeting and you said, oh my God, I don't know anything and I don't know what anyone is talking about. How am I going to sail through this?
That's a good question. I have to think about this. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I don't really know what is happening in the meeting. And I've been invited because if it were the case, I wouldn't have gone into the meeting in the first place. I may have not had 100% knowledge of what is happening, but usually before meetings, I like to prepare and ask questions from people who have invited me or whoever I'm working with on that for more information before I go in. Because one thing you need to realize is that when you are in a room as a qualified actuary, your opinion will matter. And going in with half-baked information or not knowing what's happening and then giving an opinion is very risky and it should not be done. It's unprofessional. So I think if I were an analyst and I was quite new, I would not have bothered as much because I know that there would have been someone more senior who would have guided me through it. But now, as I'm a qualified actuary and probably one of the senior people in that meeting, I would definitely feel uncomfortable not knowing what is happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, I usually would do homework before going in.
Very true.
I think like despite the numerous failures that I've had in the process of qualifying as an actuary, I feel like I've learned quite a lot over the years, and I'm still open to learning something new every day. And I think, I think the in terms of a proud like achievement, I would say like from being that student who didn't know that he needed to carry a table book to the exam, I've come a long way.
Absolutely, and I think kudos to you for that. It's such an I think it's just so insightful to hear from you about all of this, right? Because I think we see on LinkedIn that so and so person has worked here and there, but it's only when you have a conversation with them you really get to unpack
That's
so
right.
much.
I think like actuaries might come across as people who are not like approachable, but actually when you speak to them, they're quite friendly.
Yeah, exactly. I would completely agree with that. And that is something I feel is something that I want to, like, that is a myth that I generally see around me that, oh, you're an actuary, you must be really shy. And I'm like, no, not at all. My
I
friends
think
would
the newer
completely
actuaries,
disagree.
I would say like the newer breed of actuaries are definitely, they've broken that like notion of actuaries being introverts, which probably might have been the case a few years ago, but I think the newer breed of actuaries are definitely more dynamic.
I agree that they are more dynamic, but I also think that that is a function of the industry in general.
Yeah.
Because the industry roles have also become more dynamic. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I think the profession has evolved quite a bit. Actuaries are doing a lot more in wider areas. So yeah, definitely it's a function of the actuarial world evolving.
Yeah, no. And I think, we go on to our next section. We want to get to know you better. We've understood and, unpacked a lot of your professional journey, but we want to understand how you as a senior vice president at Marsh manage it all, right? So, from that, we also want to understand how you manage your work-life balance, which I think is so important. Not just for you and your productivity, but also for your mental health.
Yes.
It's quite important to kind of maintain that work-life balance, because there are times in your life where work becomes your number one priority and you're spending all your time in that. But personally, I have felt that if I live a more balanced life, I'm way more efficient and productive at work. So what do you do to maintain that balance? Do you have hobbies?
I've been lucky. I've had good managers that have not expected me to work long hours.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with the culture of the organization you work for. And I've been lucky, as I said, that, I've not had managers who asked me to do long hours to meet client needs. Sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
But it should be rare.
Yeah.
And you have to put like a stop to, a particular day, because if you're passionate about your work, then you would want to do it all day. But
exactly.
It's not good to be doing that. You should have a hobby, or you should be doing something outside of work, so that you have something else to look forward to. It's not good to just continue working long hours and not do anything else. It degrades performance. So yeah, I mean, like, just put a stop to whatever you're doing at some point during the day and pick it up the next day. Most clients are also very understanding. If you say you can't give something that particular day, then they understand. So for your own mental health as well, that's quite important, to be able to speak up and communicate to clients and say like, look, it's not realistically possible to do this. I would say you should definitely have a good work-life balance if you want longevity in this career.
So what are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? I mean, you're my friend, so I know what activities you like, but for our listeners, I would love to know.
I like working out quite a bit these days. I like to read a lot. I've continued that, over the years. I like playing sport.
Yeah.
Although now my body says I shouldn't be doing
Rushabh, if your body says that, I think we should all just go home.
I like sport. Sometimes I just like doing nothing, because you
it's need that.
If it's been a long work week, you just want to not do anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very
you
interesting.
can pick up on a lot of things. I know you like to dance, so things like that definitely are good for mental health.
Absolutely. And I think it's heartening to hear that because, most often than not, I think the work life balance or the things that you want to do outside of work will naturally come to you if you just look back at your childhood. So for
Yes.
you loved sport as a kid. So I
Yeah.
feel outside of work, if you do that, it gives you that rush.
Definitely, it brings back memories.
Exactly.
But I like it.
Exactly.
I like doing it. That's the important thing. You should be able to do something that you like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of work, even though you work long hours and you put in that shift and all of that, everyone is replaceable. So you should not think about it in that sense that if I don't do it, then it's the company's gonna stop or anything like that. Everyone.
Yeah.
So do put a stop to work at some point.
Absolutely. Before we end, we ask all our guests to give one piece of advice that they wished they had received early in their career to all the aspiring actuaries.
Carry a table book to the exam.
I think that's a good one.
No, realistically, what would be a good piece of advice? Well, something that I would have known earlier was that when you choose your first job, try to be more contemporary in terms of be versatile and understand everything. Don't narrow your what can I say? Don't narrow your thought process in the sense that you only want to do a particular thing. Try and be open to doing a lot of things. Be versatile, because the choice of where and when you should specialize would usually come with experience.
Yeah.
So in order to be able to make that decision a few years into the future, initially it's good to have an overall kind of overarching view of actuarial work. So
Absolutely.
don't conform to one form of actuarial work. That would be my advice. Someone gave that to me earlier.
That's so incredible, and I think I love that. I think that's something that my mentor told me early in my career as well, that if you don't try, you'll never know. So I absolutely love
there
that.
should be no. The one thing that the actuarial profession does teach you is that everyone will fail at some point. So that fear of failing should no longer be there when you start working.
Yeah, very true. No, I think I love that, and I think thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's been an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you. And for all our listeners, please tune in to the next episode. We're going to cover a lot more. Many thanks to Rushabh for making time for this.
Thank you for listening. If you're
Thank
still
you
there.
Great.
If you like this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.